We're going to do a short wrap-up session with myself, Tim, Mark, and Eric now. I think JT has sidled off to go and do some standardization in the SVA world. And then in about, I think probably just about 10 minutes time, we're going to try and open the floor and invite you attendees into the panelist lobby, get your cameras on, crack a beer, and just have a little bit of an informal chat. But before we do that, we'd just like to, I'd like to bring Tim, Eric, and Mark on again, and we're just going to have a little roundup session, which I'm going to ask Eric to lead because you've probably had enough of my voice, and Eric's dulcet tones are so much nicer than mine. So,
I don't know if I'd go that far, but I'll take over. Sure, I can do that.
You're better looking, and you don't wear a
That is true. That is true. That was an amazing day, wasn't it? Evening, whatever it was.
I think we got there. Where's Tim? Come on, Tim.
There's Tim. There. Yeah. All right.
There he is.
Well, I think we held it together. I think
absolutely. No, and once again, the progression throughout the day really told a story. And, for those, we'll send out a message to everyone who was not able to stick around for the whole thing, but all of these sessions will be available as separate presentations, separate on-demand videos on Streaming Media's YouTube channel. So if people didn't make it for the whole thing, they can sure catch up later on. But I would just like to ask, the three of you, since a lot of what was said today was above my pay grade, what to you, if someone missed the event entirely, what to you were the biggest takeaways? Tim, what do you think? What was the biggest takeaway for you?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is twofold. One is we have a lot of buzzwords that we talk about, edge, 5G, etc. And I think we had a number of panelists across the board who said interesting concepts, still sort of not really rolled out for prime time. And then sort of as a corollary to that, the thing that Will Law said, where he said, all CDNs are pretty much consistent these days and all CDNs interoperate. What that means is potential customers want APIs that are consistent across those CDNs so they can have the same, they can essentially write the same scenarios or use cases. But secondly, he said it makes it really hard then for a CDN to come up with new features that other CDNs aren't actually providing, and then go off and try to sell those, because if we live in a multi-CDN world, to a certain extent, it almost reminds me of the electric companies back in the day. And when I say back in the day, Edison days, where you had different power levels, you had different line sizes and that kind of thing. And until we got standardization, we couldn't cross connect between electric companies. Obviously, what we did on a national level in the US is built the grid. And that's sort of where I see we are in the CDN world. It's like the electric companies, it's like the gauges of railroad that we had in the past. Once we standardize on those, then it allows everybody to grow. So that was a really nice takeaway from me.
That's a really interesting idea, Tim. Doesn't it lead us into having, I don't know if your grid works the same as our grid over here does, but
sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Or not at all. But we have like one company which operates the actual wires and the grid, and then we have a bunch of resellers who wholesale but purchase the electricity and sell it out. So
here in the States, we've actually got pockets around the country of groups that own the grid and do power generation within their region, and then they sell across multiple regions if there's a capacity issue over or under in a given area. And that's sort of why I'm thinking the CDN model fits.
Right, I was just thinking if it kind of logically leads to the idea that we end up with a PTTs again, public telephony operators. We just have one great big global CDN and then a whole bunch of wholesalers who are selling little value-added sort of pricing deals, basically off the side.
Well, and in fact, if we take the telephony model here in the States, when AT&T was broken up into the regional Bell operating RBOX or whatever they were called, ultimately what you had there then was it forced it back to local or regional. And then you had companies step in to just offer long distance service on top of them. That's where MCI and some of the others Sprint came into play. So yeah, you're right. There could potentially come a time where there's sort of a forced decoupling of owning the pipes versus pushing the traffic across the pipes. But I don't think we're quite there yet from a monopoly.
No, I think the search for the holy format and the single codec is proven that every time anyone gets close to anything like that, somebody innovates something off at a tangent, and suddenly we're in a diverging market again.
Yeah, exactly. So that was my takeaway.
Mark, what about you?
It's funny, Tim, on the.
Sorry, can I just chip in something for panel attendees? If you're listening and you'd like to join us in the panel session and join us for a bit of informal discussion in a few minutes, you just find the raise hand button over the next few minutes. I'll promote you to panelists and bring you into the discussion, and I'll unlock the cameras for all the other panelists who are still with us as well. But sorry, Mark.
Yeah. I mean, Tim was mentioning the simplicity that basically the users of CDNs want. On the other hand, what I've also noticed is that the CDNs itself are getting more complex in everything they have to do. So it's like, yes, we want all that simplicity on using the CDN. Is like energy, it needs to be extremely simple. On the other hand, the grid is becoming extremely difficult to manage. And it's a little contradicting.
Not unlike the platform as a service model of Azure or something along those lines. I think one of the things that somebody else said today was CDNs and cloud, CDNs who own pipes and cloud CDNs who don't necessarily own pipes. Ultimately, they're both platforms. And so to your point, Mark, if it's complex, but the simplicity of the API is there, then it really does rise to the level of full-blown platform.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, if you look at, for instance, the on-net CDNs that operators are using, or even content providers that building out their own CDNs, that is getting increasingly difficult. So the fact, I mean, building a CDN just by using a number of Nginx boxes, that won't work anymore. There's just too much complexity. You either do it big or you have a very specific situation, like Adrian had with MDC, or you do it big, or you don't, and you just buy a service or you buy a solution, and that's how you go.
And in fact, some of the attendees asked questions around virtual CDNs, around no contract usage-based, build your own CDN from all those bit parts too. So,
what about you? Biggest takeaway for you?
So, as I said at the time, I was kind of, I think the word's flabbergasted by some of the numbers in Angel's presentation about Asia. That was just staggering. I mean, some of the live streaming revenues alone were larger than the market caps of some of the larger Northern American and European CDNs. And that just really puts things into perspective. That's just live streaming. I've always believed in live, and I've always sort of used a finger in the air figure that it might be 10% of all streaming. But if I can't remember the figure, 600 billion, the figures just blew my mind. But if those figures are anything to go by, I'm in the wrong part of the world. I should be selling services in Asia, because that's just some mind-blowing figures. And I think it shows what the technology means to people as well societally. I think that people are engaging with each other much more in Asia. I think people are consuming VODs in isolation over here much more. And I think that the opportunity to engage directly, to use this type of technology that we're using today, to just sit down and spend time with each other, even albeit virtual, is possibly far more normalized in Asia than it is over here. And I think there's a lot we can learn from that. And so, yeah, that was a huge takeaway for me. There were a number of other technical takeaways and details.
Well, I wonder, and that leads into my next question, which was, what surprised you the most today? And maybe that wasn't a surprise, Dom, but as you said, it was staggering, the number. Someone who's watching actually just sent me a message via text. has anybody seen any numbers for how much traffic Zoom itself is generating these days? Because it has to be mind-boggling, right?
I imagine it. I would imagine it's a significant chunk of AWS's revenue these days. Certainly outside of China, I have no idea what it's doing in China. But I mean, Zoom's obviously burst onto the scene this year, and it's a fantastic tool. You know, everything else is playing catch up, despite the sort of. I thought the competing products out in the market from familiar vendors to us over here were putting out a lot of, frankly, disinformation about Zoom and its security when they hadn't really got their own baths plugged. And Zoom responded in a way that that was also stunning. So yeah, I think there's a focus on solving problems rather than solving problems from the Asians that we really need to learn from and we really need to engage with to improve what we're doing here.
You know, Eric, something else as I read Reddit and Stack Exchange and some of the other sites, people are really trying to figure out how to prioritize Zoom content, because ultimately from an enterprise standpoint, you know, this is now the bread and butter of how work gets done. And if for whatever reason this is deprioritized or traffic shaping, you know, has fallout for Zoom, that's become an important topic for network administrators as well. So.
Just to throw something at you guys, stateside particularly, you know, given TikTok's become a political hot potato, certainly stateside, I think in some ways Zoom was lucky that TikTok happened, because I think had TikTok not happened, I think the focus would have been more strongly on Zoom, and I think Zoom would have had political challenges in the States, would have some regulatory restrictions would have been placed on it, and to give you US companies that dominance. I don't know if you guys would share that opinion.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's probably the case. The other, you know, yeah, and without going too far off on that tangent, you know, TikTok on one hand is a relatively safe target in that it's not a business platform.
Take it away from the kiddies.
Right, exactly.
Because users are disrupted. They're not
So Tim or Mark, I don't know which one of you wants to go next. What was the biggest surprise for you today?
For me, it was the open caching, at least how far they already were with the spec. I was kind of surprised how far. I mean, I've been earlier days, this is like years ago, I've been involved with IETF and Etsy in terms of standardization of and both CDNI as well as what they call CDN Federation at the time. So it's funny to see this relive again. And I knew it was out there. I just didn't know how far it already gotten already. So that's funny to see, although I still have some questions on, is it commercially, politically feasible? Technically, yes, I believe it's feasible, but will all CDNs, will all operators, will all kind of players actually really embrace this? And is it commercially viable for everybody to do it? That still remains a question. That was the biggest issue with the ICDN and CDN Federation at the time, that commercially didn't make sense to do it. So that's an interesting one. But good to see it how far it already went.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what surprised me, Eric, is I actually heard several conversations around considerations of power consumption. Greg Jones, on my first panel about compute, talked about the fact that, you know, we could push GPUs to the edge, but GPUs are very power hungry. Therefore, you want to do limited GPUs out of the edge and move more of it toward the core if possible. And then there were other people, I think Steve Miller-Jones from Limelight talked about, you know, power consumption. So to me, the surprise there is we're beginning to at least get some traction on consideration of how that shapes network design and delivery design.
Dom, any surprises in addition to the numbers that came from Angel's presentation?
So less of a surprise, more of a validation of something that's been a bit of a hunch of mine for a while. But 5G is just not on the radar for our industry. I thought that was a great comment. I can't remember who made it, but somebody made a comment. It's just another fiber. You know, I don't even think it qualifies as that. I think it's more of a copper. It's just, you know, we are. There is a big part of the industry leading a lot of people up the garden path about 5G, and it's going to be great for autonomous driving. It's going to be great for a limited number of companies doing machine-to-machine stuff, IoT stuff. But for the consumer who's being asked to pay for it, really spectrum isn't there. To get the speeds you want, you've got to be getting into astrophysics and military spectrum ranges, which just aren't available on any widespread. So just to get a 5G on my phone when I'm getting 4G service, yeah, I'm not sold on it yet myself, and I don't think this industry's in a rush. I don't think this industry's in a rush, with maybe the exception of gaming. But frankly, gamers don't want to walk around gaming. They want to sit in a room full of, you know, virtual reality chairs and you know, massive screens that's going to be attached to a fiber. They're not going to be interested in being able to do that on the bus. Well, they don't even get on a bus.
Right.
They're not.
Interesting. It just take a look at Asia and gaming, and also mobile gaming there. That's a completely different ball game than we're experiencing here in Europe and the US. So
and I would add, Mark, that I was surprised that we didn't talk that much about mobile, given how big a deal it is in Asia.
Big. I mean, let's look at printed mobile payments in China alone. They are light years ahead of what we're doing in the US and Europe.
Absolutely.
Right, but you don't need 15 milliseconds to do latency to do a mobile payment, you know. Listen, I wear the hat. I've been wearing it for years.
Gaming is still.
Right.
All right. Last question to wrap up. Between now and the next content delivery summit, whatever that might be, whenever that might be, whether it's in February or May, whether it's focused again more on Europe, or whether we possibly do one that focuses on Asia. What do you think people need to watch for in the next 4 to 6 months? What do we need to keep our eyes on?
I have two. I think one is, which is hardly mentioned at all, is low latency. I mean, in the last presentation it was mentioned a little bit, but there's quite some stuff ongoing in low latency, whether it's low latency HLS, Dash, WebRTC stuff. So there's quite some low latency stuff ongoing. I think that's at least something you need to keep an eye on. And I think the peer-to-peer part of it, I think the guy already mentioned from Lumen. Peer-to-peer is also something to keep an eye on. I've seen the first RFP for the first tender for peer-to-peer CDN out there, a public tender. And I know there's another one coming. So it's definitely being considered, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I would agree, Mark. I think the whole P2P being something that we have to pay attention to in low latency. Although I was surprised, you know, on my panel when I talked about low latency, people said, yeah, we don't really see that significant uptake over the course of the next, say, 12 months or so. But I think we all have to work ourselves around to the fact that we painted ourselves in a corner with segmentation-based delivery, and now we need to get the latencies down. The other thing on top of that, sort of adding to that, is HTTP2 and HTTP3. Will Long mentioned those, and obviously we've got Quick, we've got, you know, Apple sort of dropped the requirement in low latency HLS for use of HTTP2, but I think they had their specific reasons for doing that. I think we're going to find with 1.1 that we can't quite get to what we need to do on a low latency standpoint. So that's something, Eric, I would be paying attention to.
Yeah, that's interesting because Apple just released a Fireside 14, and it has native standard HTTP3 support. It's the first browser supporting HTTP3 in there. I mean, the other ones have it on board, but not active.
Has been its nightly builds, but as you say, but they're not active. Correct.
No, but Apple is the first one doing this. Really, it's just available now.
Yeah.
So that will open up doors.
Just to come in, I think, Mark, I totally agree. I think low latency is going to sort of resolve itself, but I sort of have a sense that we're going to see the market share for WebRTC dramatically increase over the next 6 months. I think once
It's going to be erased. I mean, the standardization which mentioned is not going to happen.
I don't think we're going to need standardization. I think we're just going to need proper offerings in the market, and I think they're starting to emerge. I think the groundwork's been done with the edge compute stuff, and WebRTC is going to come out fast as part of that rollout. And I think what you're going to see is particularly sports operators, or operators carrying sports and publishers delivering sports are going to, they're always trying to push that low latency. Low latency is their maxim. And I think that when they see whatever it is, low latency HLS hitting 2 seconds or 1 second, and then they can hit 600 millisecond or less with WebRTC, they're going to have to move to it, and it'll create the demand, which will increase the demand, which will sort of cyclically go around and make that more widely available. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if by the next CES, we're seeing presentations about really at scale, really impressive WebRTC things, and from those will come the standards. But I think there are operators out there who are doing some significant things that are going to come to market over the next 6 months.
I think the biggest surprise for me was how throughout the day it occasionally felt like 2008 again, with discussions of multicast and peer-to-peer, and CDN Federation came up again. We're still pursuing some of those things that we've been pursuing for well over a dozen years, aren't we?
I totally agree. I really do.
Well, all right.
Flash is going to come back.
I know some people who want that.
Adobe for one.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Well, actually, speaking of that, and I know Eric's going to publish an article that I did that was highlighting Bitmoven's video developer survey. One of the fascinating things in that was that 5% of segmented traffic is still HDS, which is the Adobe HTTP dynamic streaming. And as they say in the report, it refuses to die. So ultimately, you've got some of these legacy things hanging on a lot longer than we expected them to.
Sorry, just to chip in.
The same with RTMP, especially in Russia. RTMP was very, very big in Russia, and it took a long time before it got away there. So
exactly.
Real big in China. What?
Yeah.
Real continues to be with gaming. Yeah.
Something else that we should touch on before we sort of leave the familiar space. I think that what I was reading in the very early sessions, the submarine and the core IP sessions, I think it sounds to me like there are more and more routes opening up. Those guys seem busy.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot planned, a lot underway, and I think carriers are very forward-looking. They have to be there. It costs a lot of money to dig and duct and run submarine cable and so on. And I get the impression that the carrier space is going to innovate in some quite interesting ways over the next 12 to 18 months, perhaps. I think going back to Will's comment about the pandemic being the inflection point, the moment everything finally was accepted and became the norm, and now we're slowly winding down the old broadcast industries and so on. I think that moment has come, and I think the carriers are preparing for that. They're making the commitment, but it's going to take a little while for that to emerge. So I think that's going to be a strong undercurrent, and I'm looking forward to seeing how those early morning sessions develop over the next year.
In the question, Don, that I asked you to ask the submarine panel about the wet cable along the coast being international or domestic, that's a huge issue, not just in the US, but in Europe as well, because if suddenly it passes into international waters, does it change the privacy implications or the data sovereignty implications? And so I think it's a good technical response, but I think it's one that ultimately the legal framework maybe has not been touched on fully as we move to those kind of innovations.
Yeah, I'd say the probability is high.
What about it?
Policy frameworks are going to change as well over the next couple of years. Just global geopolitics is going to make a shift. It's sort of coming full cycle, and I think you know, mere conduit status is one of those things that's the preserve of network providers. But once they start playing with caches and compute, they get into a data privacy issue. So yeah.
Well, all right. I think that wraps up the official portion of the day, doesn't it?
I think it does. I think what I'll do is I'll just so that Steve can find the endpoint of the formal sessions. I'll play the sting, but then I'll come back on air, and we'll see if we can entice any of the remaining attendees into have a bit of an informal chat, and we can play some drinking games. So with that, I'd like to thank, most importantly, I'd like to thank Tim and Mark for a splendid day of moderation. It's been again wonderful to have you as wingmen for the session. So Tim, thank you very much.
Absolutely, always a joy. And you know, tomorrow I'll go off and do the dangerous things on the mountain climbing vehicle. Just for you today, not to do that.
And don't do it before SMAF next month either. And for those of you who don't know, we all host a monthly podcast called SMAF, or SM Advanced Forum. Do look it up online. Had to plug that, Eric. So.
Absolutely.
And Mark, thank you very much as well. It was wonderful, great moderation on all your panels. It was great. It was really appreciated.
Great being there.
I think I should hand to you, Eric, and then I'll play the sting out once you've closed.
All right. Thank you very much, folks. It's been an amazing day. That wraps it up for Content Delivery Summit Autumn 2020.